You see, there was a major political rally held last night at Melbourne's Marvel Stadium. And not just any sort of rally, but a rally for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was hosted by our own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. The crowd numbered in the tens of thousands, and according to one report, tickets to the event sold out, quote, faster than a Taylor Swift concert. Albanese was almost sycophantic in his welcome, saying that Modi was, quote, a dear friend, unquote, of his, though he didn't quite go so far as giving him the full Kylie Minogue treatment, thank gosh. But anyway, the two posed for selfies, and Modi was just as effusive in return, even doing a welcome to country.
I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.
And they were joined by Victorian Premier Jacinta Allan, who is deeply on the nose and hoping, of course, to win over the large Indian community in her state. Allan was also effusive, bragging that Victoria had a larger Indian population than anywhere in the country. Now, before I go any further, I want to make sure that we're all very clear here. I don't want to be misunderstood. Australians of Indian heritage are great contributors to our community. They are hardworking and enterprising. They put a massive value on education. Their kids do phenomenally well in school, and they are happily, seriously underrepresented in crime statistics. But that said, does anybody else find it a little weird that our Australian Prime Minister hosted a political rally for a foreign leader on Australian soil? Particularly someone like Modi, who is, frankly, often criticized for his brand of Hindu nationalism. I thought we might do a little thought experiment here. Think about this. Imagine if Nigel Farage, a great if controversial exponent of British nationalism, well, imagine if he becomes Prime Minister of the UK at their next general election. Then think about this. Well, there is a huge British population here in Australia too. But does anyone imagine that whomever the Prime Minister of the day is, could it be Albanese, Taylor, Pauline Hanson, do you think that they would get away with holding a rally for them on Australian soil? I'm not so sure. And the reason why I am not sure is, and the reason why I think there is such a debate right now over this whole issue of multiculturalism, monoculturalism, Australian identity, why this debate is so poignant right now is precisely because Australians see the way, under Labor's version of multiculturalism, other cultures, other nationalities are celebrated, elevated, even with political rallies, even as their own culture is run down or denigrated. I want to bring you a little bit here of Victoria's Premier Jacinta Allan, who I mentioned before. Here's a bit of what she had to say at the rally.
Picture this, 30,000 people packed into a stadium chanting a foreign leader's name while the Australian Prime Minister stands there beaming like he just won the lottery. No, this is not a Bollywood premiere. This actually happened this week in Melbourne, and it might be one of the strangest political spectacles this country has ever seen. Quick favour before we get into it, if you are enjoying these breakdowns, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Over 90% of you watching right now have not subscribed yet, and it genuinely helps the channel keep doing this kind of coverage. It is free, it takes 2 seconds, and it means the world. Right, back to the show.
Let me say this to Victoria's great, strong Indian community who are here tonight. You are welcome here. Your children never have to choose between being proudly Indian and proudly Victorian, because in this state you can be both.
Yeah, you see the issue here? I mean, this is where Tony Abbott goes when he talks about the problem of an immigration program that encourages people to treat Australia more like a hotel than a home. And this is why I am concerned, and why I think Australians are a bit concerned, because not only does this feel like blatant ethnic politicking, and I guess in some ways there's nothing new there, but I would say that perhaps a few people owed Jacinta Price maybe a little bit of an apology, because this was absolutely about Labour courting ethnic votes. But also think of the message. Think about what Jacinta Allan is saying there. It sounds very much like, come to Australia, but you don't need to bother becoming full members of the Australian community, the Australian mainstream, which of course is welcoming of people from all over the world. Instead, it's saying you can live within your own communities, do your own thing. I mean, the word assimilation has gone out the window a long time ago, but this here, what we're talking about, I'm sorry, this is not a recipe for social cohesion. It's a recipe for ethnic separatism and ghettoization. I don't think anybody wants to see that. Now, there's a bit more that was funny about this trip. Remember this back during the last federal election campaign when Labour was running a scare campaign around nuclear energy, leaning heavily on the Simpsons' Blinky the three-eyed fish? And how many times have you heard Energy Minister Chris Bowen say lines like this?
Renewables are the cheapest form of energy and nuclear is the most expensive form of energy, Mr Speaker. This is consistent with findings overseas and has been consistent with continual findings by the CSIRO and AEMO.
So this is apparently the Labour position. Nuclear power is scary and it's expensive. It's the most expensive form of energy. Again, at least according to Labour during the last federal election campaign. And yet on this trip, Modi and Albanese agreed for Australia to export uranium to India for use in their civilian nuclear power program. That's kind of funny. But think about the contradiction here. On the one hand, we are told that nuclear power is too expensive for a rich country like Australia. But it's just jake for a developing country like India. What are we doing here? How does this make sense? And it's all the more interesting when you recall that back in 2011, at the Federal Labour Caucus that year, Anthony Albanese opposed the then Gillard government's move to lift a ban on exporting uranium to India. He's certainly changed his tune, hasn't he? Now, look, I'm glad we've found a bit of the mining industry Labour is not rushing to kneecap by jumping on ancient woo about blue-banded bees or whatever. But again, I ask, where is the logic? India gets cheap energy. Yes, I said cheap from Australia via our uranium. That's great. Getting closer economic ties, visas. But what's in it for us here? I'm sorry, but it does feel like Albo has let himself and Australia get a bit played here in exchange for a blessing from a foreign leader and the big swag of votes he could potentially bring home for Labour.
So here is what actually went down. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi rolled into Melbourne's Marvel Stadium for an event literally called Melbourne Meets Modi, and Anthony Albanese was right there beside him, practically glowing. Crowds chanting his name, cultural performances, flags waving everywhere. Now, nobody is disputing that the Indian-Australian community has been an enormous asset to this country, hard-working, high-achieving, and genuinely woven into the fabric of our cities. That is not the issue. The issue was watching your own Prime Minister host what looked suspiciously like a foreign leader's political rally on Australian soil. And that brings us to the real head-scratcher. Victorian Premier Jacinta Allan stood up there and leaned hard into the idea that you can be proudly Indian and proudly Victorian at the same time, which sounds lovely on paper, but critics reckon it is exactly the kind of identity politics that quietly discourages the whole point of migration in the first place, which is joining one nation, not maintaining a dozen separate ones inside it. Try to imagine the reaction if Australia hosted a rally for a European nationalist figure and a state premier gave a speech celebrating dual loyalty. The outrage would be instant. But wait, it gets juicier. While all this was happening, Albanese and Modi quietly signed off on a deal to export Australian uranium to India for its nuclear program. Let that sink in for a second. This is the same Labor government that spent the last election campaign telling Australians nuclear power was too dangerous, too expensive, practically radioactive Simpsons material for our own backyard. Yet apparently it is perfectly fine to ship the stuff overseas. And here's the kicker. Albanese himself opposed uranium sales to India back in 2011. Fast forward to now, and that principle has evaporated faster than you can say election year. So, was this a genuine diplomatic win, or did Australia just get played on the world stage for a bit of ethnic vote chasing? You decide. Thank you for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.